Woman takes ex-husband to court for child support, but what the judge discovers shocks everyone. But first, remember to subscribe to our channel so we can keep sharing incredible stories. Sarah Thompson sat nervously in the courthouse waiting area, clutching a folder filled with receipts, school records, and medical bills. She looked down at her daughter, Emma, who was drawing with crayons on a piece of scrap paper, blissfully unaware of the tension in the air. It hadn't been an easy decision to take Jack, her ex-husband, to court for child support. She'd hoped that, despite their differences, he would step up for their daughter. But after years of broken promises, missed payments, and Jack's refusal to contribute, Sarah knew she had no other choice. When Jack walked in, Sarah's heart clenched. He looked polished, like he always did, wearing an expensive suit and a practiced smile. He seemed confident, as if he expected to walk in and out of the courtroom without any real consequences. They hadn't spoken directly in over a year, and Sarah could see no hint of remorse in his face, only the cool indifference that had once made her feel small back when they were married. The court clerk called their case, and they both rose. The judge, a woman with a stern but fair gaze, began by reviewing the basic details. Sarah's lawyer presented the documents that proved Emma's expenses and showed how Jack had failed to make his payments. Jack's lawyer countered, arguing that he was struggling financially and couldn't afford to provide the support Sarah was demanding. But as the judge pressed for details, Jack's answers became evasive. He claimed that his business had suffered recent setbacks and that he was barely scraping by. Sarah could hardly believe her ears. She knew Jack well enough to know when he was lying, but proving it would be another matter entirely. Just as she felt her hope fading, her lawyer leaned over and whispered, "We have one more piece of evidence to present. It might just change everything." The judge looked between them, curiosity in her gaze, and granted permission for this new evidence. Sarah braced herself, unsure of what would happen next, but sensing that this was about to become much more than a simple child support case. As the room settled, Sarah's lawyer stood and handed a stack of documents to the judge. "Your Honor," he began, "these records indicate that Mr. Miller has additional sources of income he failed to disclose." He turned to Jack, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his confident demeanor beginning to falter. "These documents reveal that Mr. Miller owns multiple rental properties and has been receiving significant monthly income from these assets." The judge raised an eyebrow, flipping through the pages, her expression growing more serious with each new detail. Jack's lawyer stood quickly, objecting that the information was obtained without proper notification. But Sarah's lawyer countered smoothly, explaining that the records were public, accessed legally through property registries and business filings. Jack's face flushed as he realized he'd been caught. Sarah felt a surge of anger mixed with validation. All those times he'd claimed to be struggling, to have nothing to give, while he had been hiding these resources, living comfortably, and allowing their daughter to go without. She glanced at Emma, who was now drawing in the corner, blissfully unaware of the tension filling the room. This wasn't just about money, it was about the principles of honesty and responsibility that Jack had ignored for too long. The judge, clearly disturbed by what she was reading, looked at Jack. "Mr. Miller, do you have an explanation for why these assets were not disclosed?" Jack stumbled over his words, trying to claim that he hadn't considered these properties as income since the rent barely covered maintenance costs. But the judge wasn't buying it. "These properties are assets, Mr. Miller, and by withholding this information, you've violated the court's request for full financial disclosure." Jack's lawyer attempted to regain control, arguing that the properties were recent acquisitions meant for future security. But the judge's expression remained stern. "Regardless of your intentions, withholding this information is misleading, especially given the nature of these proceedings." As Jack struggled to defend himself, Sarah's lawyer seized the moment. "Your Honor, The evidence presented here clearly shows Mr. Miller's capacity to contribute more substantially to his daughter's welfare. This concealment speaks not only to his financial capabilities, but also to his character. The tension in the courtroom rose as the judge leaned forward, her gaze sharp. "Mr. Miller, I'll be reviewing this evidence closely. This case is no longer about simple financial hardship. It's about transparency and integrity. We'll resume after a recess." As the court adjourned temporarily, Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. Jack's mask was slipping, and soon, she sensed, the truth would come out in full. When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was tense. Jack's confident facade had shattered, replaced by a visible layer of anxiety. He leaned toward his lawyer, speaking in hushed, hurried tones, as if desperately trying to devise a strategy to explain the hidden assets. Sarah, watching him closely, could see the cracks forming in his carefully constructed image. The judge addressed the court. "In light of these new revelations, I'm ordering a full audit of Mr. Miller's finances. We need transparency to ensure that this case is resolved fairly and in the best interest of the child." The judge's decision sparked murmurs in the gallery as people whispered about the unfolding drama. Jack's lawyer attempted to regain control, arguing that an audit was unnecessary and invasive, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand, her tone firm. "This is not just a question of financial support, Mr. Miller. The court has to trust that all information provided is accurate and truthful. Any further attempt to withhold information will be viewed as contempt." As the auditor began going through Jack's financial records, more secrets emerged. They found luxury vacations, expensive jewelry purchases, and even a separate bank account that he used to fund a lifestyle far more extravagant than he had ever let on. Jack's face turned ashen as each detail came to light, and Sarah could hardly believe the person she was hearing about was the same man she had once been married to. At one point, the auditor looked up and announced, "It appears Mr. Miller has been paying substantial sums to another woman, identified here as his fiancée, and supporting her lifestyle as well." This statement sent a shockwave through the room. Sarah's jaw dropped, and she felt a pang of anger and hurt, remembering all the times he had told her he couldn't afford even the basics for Emma. Jack stammered, trying to justify the expenses, claiming he'd only been trying to move on with his life. But his excuses sounded hollow and self-serving, even to his own lawyer, who shifted uncomfortably beside him. The judge's expression grew even more severe as Jack's financial manipulations became increasingly evident. Sarah's lawyer seized the opportunity, pressing Jack about his choices and pointing out how he had knowingly prioritized his personal comfort and relationships over his own daughter's well-being. The line of questioning was brutal, stripping away any remaining sympathy the court might have felt for Jack. His attempt to paint himself as the victim was falling apart, and each new revelation further damaged his credibility. With each question, Jack's defenses crumbled. By the time the judge finally called for another break, Jack looked defeated, as though the weight of his lies had finally caught up with him. Sarah felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. She hadn't expected this level of betrayal, but now, with the truth out in the open, there was no turning back. When the session resumed, Jack's lawyer took a new approach, attempting to portray Jack as a man who had simply made mistakes under pressure. "Your Honor, my client regrets his actions and is prepared to rectify the situation. He understands that his priorities were misplaced and is ready to make amends," the lawyer argued, a hint of desperation in his voice. But the judge was unmoved. "Mr. Miller, this court is not here to forgive or excuse. We're here to ensure that justice is served and that Emma receives the support she deserves," she said firmly. Turning to Sarah, the judge continued, "Ms. Thompson, is there anything else you would like to add?" Sarah took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly as she rose. "Your Honor, I didn't come here for revenge. I came because my daughter deserves to live without financial struggle. Jack was once a loving father, and I don't understand what changed. But this is about Emma, and I can't let her be affected by his choices anymore." The judge nodded, clearly affected by Sarah's words. Just then, the court doors opened, and a woman entered the room hurriedly. She was well-dressed, visibly anxious, and seemed out of place in the proceedings. As she approached Jack, the tension in the room spiked. Whispers broke out as people recognized her. The woman was Jack's fiancée, the one he'd been secretly supporting. Her presence was unexpected, and her expression showed that she was here for a purpose. She stepped forward, addressing the judge directly. "Your Honor, I have something I need to say." The judge granted her permission to speak, and the woman turned to face Jack with a look of betrayal and fury. "Jack, I didn't know you were hiding assets or that you had a child you refused to support. I believed you when you said you were struggling, that we were building a future together with the little you had. But now, standing here, I see the real story, and I can't be part of this." Her voice broke as she finished, her hands trembling. The fiancé then turned to Sarah, saying, "I'm sorry, I didn't know any of this." The courtroom was silent, everyone stunned by this unexpected confrontation. Jack tried to speak, to explain himself, but his fiancée simply shook her head, turning and walking out of the courtroom without looking back. With her exit, Jack seemed to deflate, his final support disappearing before his eyes. The judge, taking in everything, looked back at Jack with a steely gaze. "It seems that your dishonesty has hurt more people than just your daughter. I have no choice but to proceed with my decision, taking into account all that has been revealed here today." Jack slumped in his seat, visibly defeated. He had lost not only his financial security, but also the respect of those closest to him. As Sarah watched him, she felt a strange sense of closure. This was not the man she once loved, but rather someone whose own actions had led him to this point. Now, all that remained was the judge's final decision. As the courtroom quieted, the judge straightened and glanced at the papers before her, her voice firm and clear. "Mr. Miller, in light of your repeated dishonesty and failure to disclose your financial assets, this court finds you in contempt. You have acted in bad faith, not only towards Ms. Thompson, but also in your responsibility as a father. This court has no choice but to enforce the maximum penalties allowed." The judge turned to Sarah, her tone softening. "Ms. Thompson, I am ordering that you receive full custody of Emma. Additionally, I am mandating a substantial increase in Mr. Miller's child support payments, adjusted to reflect his true income and assets. Should he fail to comply, he will face serious legal consequences." Jack opened his mouth to object, but the judge cut him off. "Mr. Miller, your actions have left this court no room for leniency. You prioritized your comfort and hid your assets at the expense of your daughter. This ruling is not merely a financial obligation, it is a reminder of the responsibility you hold as a parent." As the verdict settled, Sarah felt a wave of relief and justice. But the judge wasn't finished. She addressed Jack one last time, her words carrying a surprising twist. "Given the circumstances, I'm also ordering that Mr. Miller complete a program in family responsibility and financial management. It is clear that your priorities need realignment, and if you hope to regain any trust in this court, you will comply with these terms." Jack, visibly shaken, nodded numbly. His lawyer placed a hand on his shoulder, but the damage was done. The court clerk declared the case adjourned, and the room erupted in low murmurs as people processed the dramatic conclusion. Outside the courtroom, Sarah felt a lightness she hadn't felt in years. She knelt down to Emma's level, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "We did it, sweetie, did. Things are going to be okay now." Emma hugged her, sensing the change, even if she didn't fully understand it. As they began to walk away, Sarah was approached by Jack's fiancée, who had been waiting in the hallway. She looked at Sarah with remorse. "I'm sorry for what he put you through. I had no idea, and thank you for opening my eyes." Sarah offered a small nod, recognizing the sincerity in the woman's voice. "Thank you. I didn't want it to be this way, but Emma deserved the truth. We all did." With that, Sarah turned and walked out of the courthouse, holding Emma's hand tightly. She felt empowered, as though she was finally closing the chapter on years of betrayal and hardship. As they stepped into the sunlight, she looked down at her daughter and smiled, knowing that their future was now in her hands and that they would face it together, stronger than ever.